Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Millstone Podcast. I'm your host Aaron, and I'm going to be dedicating this podcast to reading in its entirety and showing the viewer my interpretation of the Ethiopian Bible. Now, many of you may have heard of this version of the Bible, but for those of you who have not, here's a brief introduction to it. The Ethiopian Bible is one of the oldest and most complete versions of the Bible ever found. This book is believed to have been written around the year 494 AD, though some sources claim that it was written even earlier than that. For centuries, it was kept hidden in a monastery, high up in the mountains, until it was rediscovered in the 1940s by a female British art historian who was visiting the Tigray region of Ethiopia to see this very monastery that was known as the Abba Garima monastery. Now, due to some cultural reasons, women were not allowed to enter the monastery, but even still, this art historian, a female, was able to view much of the intricately illustrated texts due to the monks' willingness to carry the books out of the building for her to see. The Ethiopian Bible has a long and storied past that dates way back. To start, at the beginning of its recorded history, in 494 AD, Abba Garima, for whom the monastery is named in which it was kept, traveled from Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and he transcribed the book on goatskin in the language of Ge'ez. Abba Garima used the Codex Sinaiticus to translate the language. Now, the Codex contained both the Septuagint, which is the Old and the New Testaments, as well as the Apocrypha, which includes the Book of Wisdom, Maccabees, and many others that were eventually left out of the King James Version of the Bible many years later. Because these and other books are present in the Ethiopian Bible, Abba Garima must have also had a copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls with him during his translation, because he chose to include them in his authoring of the Ethiopian Bible. This inclusion of the Dead Sea Scrolls is the primary evidence that modern theologians cite to discredit the Ethiopian Bible as a whole, though it is my argument that due to the merger of a pagan tradition and Christianity set forth by Emperor Constantine, the Dead Sea Scrolls were intentionally discarded in an attempt to cover up a truth that would upset the pagan roots of Constantine's Christianity. Over a century prior to Garima's translation, Roman Emperor Constantine the Great commissioned the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. His aim was to eliminate the infighting of the Church over the issue of canonical texts versus those that were of questionable background. The council decided that any books that were written by those who did not physically see Jesus preach, nor were they a direct follower of him during his time here on earth during his first coming, would be excluded from the New Testament. If you know anything about Roman history, you'll understand that Rome was historically a pagan nation, and hardly a monotheistic one either. For centuries, the Romans practiced polytheism and worshipped fallen angels such as Apollo and numerous other lesser gods, all while neglecting the one true God. Though he publicly decreed his conversion to Christ, it is questionable whether Constantine was in fact a Christian, as he was pagan for the majority of his life, and even though he professed his Christianity in 312 AD, he was only ever baptized shortly before his death in 337 AD, years later. While baptism is hardly a necessity for one's salvation, Constantine did exhibit many signs of still being a practicing pagan throughout his life, even after his alleged vision and the commanding of his armies to paint crucifixes on their shields, which was allegedly the action responsible for both his victory at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD and his alleged conversion to Christianity. While Constantine's choice of worship is gray, the Council of Nicaea had a very clear mission from him: simplify and standardize the Bible, and in doing so, eliminate any texts that may cause confusion. The council followed this mission to a T. In 325 AD, they founded the Nicene Creed, which is an oath that one might hear incoherently mumbled by a brain-dead church congregation on any given Sunday morning. They also placed the date of Easter upon an astrologically significant date, a date that was previously held in regard by the Romans as the holiday of choice to worship Venus, also known as Ishtar, who was a fallen angel and the Roman goddess of fertility and love. This holiday marked the start of spring, and the Romans would pray to Venus to bless their crop yield, provide them with new children, or find love, among many other things. The Council of Nicaea co-opted this holiday knowingly, in an alleged attempt to bring the Roman populace under the wing of Christianity. But God has a thing or two to say about this. In Exodus 20, verse 3, "You shall have no other gods before me." Now this command only makes sense if there are indeed other lowercase g gods. Finally, the council sought to destroy the texts they deemed to be extra-canonical. The The Bishop of Rome went as far as commanding his priests to destroy the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, fortunately for us, however, those priests either knew better or were influenced by divine intervention, and they chose to preserve the scrolls in clay jars that were discovered later in the 1940s. All of this to say that this book is one of the oldest surviving versions of the Bible, having resided in a remote monastery for centuries, guarded by men of the cloth. It survived the jihads, the responding crusades, world wars, and even a massive fire in the 1930s. Not only is this version of the Bible one of the oldest, but it's also the most complete ever found, containing the original 88 books of the Bible as opposed to the King James's 66. And 66 has got to just be a coincidence, right? I'm sure it's not anything important. Despite the Catholic Church and its many attempts to discredit, obscure, and even destroy many of these books, they still survived, and they're available to us today between the bindings of the Ethiopian Bible. Now please join me as we start our journey to learn more about this text that God has allowed to be preserved for us to read. In the following videos, we will read through the entirety of the Ethiopian Bible, translated to English by Augustine Vesper. Thank you, and God bless.